Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Cindy Reed, and I'm an executive coach with Lee Hecht Harrison and the chair of the Wellesley Business Leadership Council's Board Initiative. Our mission in connection with this initiative is to promote Wellesley women for board service and to give them the tools they need to succeed in the boardroom. Today, we are partnering with Wellesley's Career Education Office as well to bring you the power of nonprofit board service. And it is my great pleasure and great honor to introduce my dear friend and BLC colleague, Susan Harmon, who will be presenting today. Susan, for those of you who don't know her, was an executive in public broadcasting for many years, serving on the national network boards of National Public Radio and Public Radio International, and the Station Resource Group, a public radio think tank which she co-founded. She also co-founded Public Media Company, a nonprofit that is a strategic advisor to public media with a specialty in buying and financing stations for NPR. She now serves on two boards herself, a local classical music organization, King FM in Seattle, where she lives, and the national board of Public Media Company. She joined Wellesley's Business Leadership Council in 1989 and is a former co-chair of the BLC board. We are so grateful and so lucky to have Susan presenting on this topic today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Susan.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Well, I can't think of anything more rewarding than getting to spend an hour with Wellesley alumni from across the United States and around the world. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about nonprofit board service because I think there are tremendous opportunities for Wellesley women to lead in this sector. So today our goal for this, there's so many ways to talk about this, but what I want to focus on today is how we encourage greater nonprofit board service by Wellesley women, and also to explore how to give it our best effort. So here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to talk for maybe 35 to 40 minutes, and my comments happily include ideas and stories from other Wellesley alumni who are also members of Wellesley's Business Leadership Council and have extensive experience serving on nonprofit boards. And because our time is short, I hope this is just the beginning of a longer, more in-depth conversation about nonprofit board service. After I finish talking, if you use the chat function on your handy-dandy Zoom technology, you can give comments and questions, and we'll try to go through as many as we can. Now, if any of the slides or the recording is of interest to take notes, I will just tell you that it will be posted on the Business Leadership Council website as well as on Career Ed's alumni resources post. So you don't have to take notes, you can see it again if it is of interest. Okay, the aspects that we want to cover today really are four. What I want to talk about first is give you a snapshot of the nonprofit sector focused in the United States, while also nonprofits are growing around the world. But today's focus is on the nonprofit sector in the United States. Secondly, I want to look at why we serve on a nonprofit board, what there is in it for us. Thirdly, how to choose your board. And we talk a lot about how to get selected. That's important, but I sometimes think we shortchange how to choose the right one. So we'll focus on that. And finally, being a good board member. I have some good stories from our other alumni about this. My hope is that if you are already serving on a board, there'll be some interesting information about ways that other Wellesley alumni have approached their board responsibilities. And if you're considering nonprofit board service, that we'll say something today that will spur you on in picking the right avenue for service. So first of all, let's look at the nonprofit sector. And as I said before, we're focused on the United States, but I think it's important to see what kind of scope we have here. In 2019, there was a report earlier this year, actually, from the Center for Civil Society Studies at Johns Hopkins University, and they say that from 2005 to 15, the number of nonprofit organizations registered with the IRS rose from 1.4 million to almost 1.6 million in the United States. So that is a recent increase of about 10%. Now, these organizations comprise a diverse range of services. You're probably very familiar in your own communities with nonprofits in the arts, health, religion, education, advocacy nonprofits, labor unions, business, and professional organizations. But what is so interesting to me is that nonprofits account for roughly 1 in 10 jobs in the United States private workforce and are growing both in the United States and worldwide. Nonprofit jobs grew almost 4 times faster than in the for-profit sector between 2007 and the present in the U.S., and for the first time, nonprofit employment now equals manufacturing. In 2008, there was a report from Giving USA estimating that nonprofits contributed $985 billion to the U.S. economy, or over 5% of the GDP. And funding of nonprofits, you may know, comes from 3 principal sources: individual philanthropy, grants from foundations and government, and revenue earned from services. So in summary, nonprofit organizations are a far more sizable economic force in this country than is commonly appreciated in terms of scope, jobs, and of course of service. Now to mention some of the growth and challenges for the sector. In a recent article for Forbes magazine, authors Nathaniel Calhoun and Darlene Dam argued that the nonprofit sector can be one of the most innovative sectors in American life. And they cite growth of nonprofits outpacing both government and business in the last decade. And generally, they attribute this to the fact that we're not talking about outsourcing jobs overseas, but nonprofit jobs in the U.S. that require human touch and social intelligence, particularly in health, the arts, and the education sectors. And they see nonprofits benefiting greatly from technology. We're all, I think, familiar with crowdsourcing, so technology is helping in fundraising for nonprofits and also in providing service. And finally, they make the point that nonprofits are freer to share information than in the more competitive corporate sector. So there are ways to help one another, perhaps in these different areas. But lest we paint too rosy a picture of the nonprofit sector, I want to just mention 3 challenges. Raising capital for investments and assets in new services is a big challenge for nonprofits. Staff turnover is also something we always have to keep our eye on if salaries don't imbue retention. And then finally, evaluating success. Boards talk about this a lot. How do we know we're succeeding? What are the indicators that we're doing a good job? So in summary, the sector is a powerful one with both great social impact, a set of challenges and opportunities for innovation. And in general, I would say that organizations in this sector can simply not be effective without good governance. So why should Wellesley women get involved in this? Why serve on nonprofit boards? Well, it may be very obvious, but I have to start with our motto, which is lodged somewhere in all of our psyches, not to be ministered unto, but to minister. So this motto in mind is really appropriate for nonprofit service because you are sharing your talents, your time, very precious, and resources through nonprofit board service, and leadership certainly resonates with our common background at Wellesley. To minister is the basic premise of nonprofit board service. So then passion. And this is really one of my favorite ones. It's a key motivation. You get involved in these boards because it's a cause or an organization that you really care about. Theater, education, public media, health services. For example, alumna Chris Miller, president of Christine Miller Marketing and Communications Consulting, talks about her passion for going to the theater and why being on a theater board was so much fun. She was closer to the action. She learned about the business of theater, and she was helping a sector that she passionately believes in. Personal growth. This is something that I think is very important to all of us who went to Wellesley. And on boards, you are learning from others who share your passion. Wellesley alumna Sandy Gussman, who's chairman of the board of the Polk Brothers Foundation, was speaking to MBA candidates at the Kellogg Business School in Chicago when she talked about how much play there is between the skills in the profit-making world, and I'll tell you that Sandy was a star at IBM for many years, and the nonprofit sector. She cites bringing corporate skills such as marketing and the ability to deal with large bureaucracies and about finance to the nonprofit sector from the profit making. From the nonprofit sector, you gain contacts, understand more about collaboration and team building, and from Sandy's point of view, develop listening and leadership skills. Well, I remember a board that where the chair, a board that I served on, where the chair before every vote went around the room to ask each person if he or she had one more point to make. That technique was so great because it smoothed out the difference between big and small talkers and made us all really focus before the vote. I picked up that technique from that board experience and used it whenever I was making important decisions with groups at work. Now, meeting other board members can also lead to service on other boards. A specific question that often comes up is whether nonprofit board service can lead to service on corporate boards. Well, Cindy Reed tells this story. She was serving on the board of the Rhode Island Foundation with board members, including a board member of Ocean Point Financial Bank, Newport. Cindy chaired the finance committee at the foundation, and this man was on her committee. When his term expired on the for-profit Ocean Point board, he tapped Cindy to replace him. Now, the bank was going through a CEO succession, and they were specifically looking for someone who would bring a new perspective to that process, as well as someone who had some experience in the entrepreneurial community where they saw an expansion possibility. So while Cindy's story also relates to her specific skills going into the situation and the board colleague who observed her, the point is made that you are getting to know other community leaders who may think of you for other nonprofit or corporate boards where your work experience, your style, your approach may be an asset. So, how do we choose our board? Here we have lots of advice from other Wellesley alumni. First thing is to decide how many boards you can handle and what you want their focus to be. Now, as Barbara Creed, alumna in San Francisco, approached retirement from her law practice, she decided she wanted to serve on up to 3 boards, preferably one with a local focus, a national, and another with an international. She also picked organizations where she could imagine being chair of the board. She used this as a way of gauging her level of interest as well as the potential of actually having a leadership role. She not only found her boards, but she also did become chair, of course. Now, I would echo Barbara on the decision to serve on only up to 3 nonprofit boards. Depending on the intensity of your day job, one board may be the choice at this stage of your life. Since I stopped working, I currently serve on 2 nonprofit media boards, as Cindy mentioned in her introduction, and that feels like just the right amount I need right now, given other responsibilities in my life and the use of my time. In both cases, they're small boards between 10 to 15 members, and I would just tell you that that's my personal favorite board size because you get to spread the workload, but also you feel very much that your presence and your work really makes a difference. And in both boards, I'm involved in supporting the CEO in fundraising as well as financial support. So that kind of activity can keep you busy. Now, for this talk, I reached out to alum Sarah O'Donnell, who is an advisor to Greater China Retail Consumer Goods in Hong Kong, Stephanie Shea, who's CEO of Metatroke Biosciences, and Corporate Director Mary McBride. And they all recommended being very intentional in choosing which board you want to serve on and really doing your homework before signing up. So I want to share some of the things that they had to say. These are just such a great list, I think. What are you being asked to do? Who is the CEO? And do you respect, have chemistry with them? Do they seem to want, what do they want from their board? And you specifically. There are nonprofit organizations that need your name and financial support, an ornamental role, as Sarah calls it, but not necessarily your ideas. Are you expected to attend meetings, work on committees? Exactly what is the financial expectation in terms of your giving to the organization? What do other board members say about expectations and organizational culture? Is there a capital campaign in progress? How long has the CEO been there? Does anyone expect he or she to leave? CEO or executive director succession planning is critical. Interviewing and selecting a new CEO is time consuming, and gaps in leadership can really affect the culture and execution at a nonprofit. Now, Mary adds that small nonprofits can be very demanding, and her experience is that Wellesley women usually end up doing most of the work. She was once a treasurer for a nonprofit, and the accounting finance staff member quit. She ended up doing the accounting, writing checks, and handling payroll until a replacement could be hired. Now, finally, we collectively recommend talking with the chair or CEO before you agree to serve, so you are very clear about goals, expectations, and their understanding of what skills you bring. Sometimes when you're passionate about the mission of an organization, if you see turmoil in the relationship between the board and staff or troubling financial issues, you just may decide that you have to walk away from that much drama. So in summary here, we are really talking about serious homework. So you'll see that I was really dwelling on how carefully you should choose your board service. And I do that because I think it's a process that is often overlooked, or as I said before, shortcut, because we're so eager to get on a board. So the flip side is, of course, getting selected. Now, a starting point, I believe, is to show an interest in the organization you'd like to serve. Participate, use their services, volunteer, make a contribution. That always gets the attention of the chair or CEO. Then if you see that the board of the organization has potential for your participation, put the word out. And that includes speaking to the CEO of that organization or a current board member. I think too often we wait to be asked. That's the polite thing to do, perhaps, in our minds. But I think more to the point, we need to speak up about our interests, because these boards are eager to get smart women leaders. So that's my piece of advice on that score. So now let's look at thoughts on being a good board member. You may be on a board or two or three, and you're thinking about how you give it your best effort. Key responsibilities of the nonprofit boards that we're talking about here are to advance the goals of the organization. So how do you do that? Well, you're trying to make the organization financially stable, and you have to plan and support and do succession planning for the CEO of the organization. Usually, every board member is expected to contribute annually, as well as to capital or special campaigns. And usually, as well, there's a substantial amount of fundraising on behalf of the organization. So you have to think through if you're comfortable in those various roles. And again, this kind of goes back to the choosing the board that's right for you. And really healthy organizations where the CEO sees the potential of skillfully involving board members in strategic work, it can be a joy to volunteer as a board member, and where you partner with the senior staff in the development of a strategic framework for the organization. To a person, the BLC members with whom I exchanged ideas for this talk remark on how gratifying and interesting their nonprofit board service is. And there's certain fundamental governance and financial protocols that apply in both the nonprofit and corporate spheres. And those who come to the nonprofit board with experience in building and rapidly scaling of organizations can provide a great sounding board for the CEO, be very helpful in the strategic work, and of course, in the financial areas as well, as you help plan for the growth of nonprofits, related HR needs, potential problems down the line, and of course, expansion. Are we maximizing what we can do as a nonprofit? Pam Porter, who is managing partner of Stepping Stones Partners, advises nonprofit board members to really help the organization be clear about who they are, who is the target customer, what is the value they offer, how can they increase the effectiveness of the outputs of the organization. And this is a personal favorite. When someone looks at the website, is it really clear who you are, who you serve, what you do, how do you do it? And then does your website speak to customers and donors? So too often it's not clear. It's so general that one really understands, except to know that this organization is probably good. So you want to be much more specific. And Pam adds something that I think is wonderful: to praise in public and criticize in private. She says that while this may be a bit old-fashioned, it's about relationships. Building trust with the CEO is very important. And if you are a board member, you are by definition a champion of the organization. So how does senior staff see the board? I wanted to touch on this side of this perspective. What makes a good board member for them? Well, Marilyn Smith, Wellesley alumna, who is Vice President of Information Technology at George Mason University in Virginia, underlines how important it is for senior staff to feel that the board really understands the vision and mission of the entity, the strategy and operational plans, and their role in guidance and oversight versus trying to micromanage senior management. That's not what we're doing on these boards. And with this background, board members can ask good questions and really be partners with senior staff. Marilyn also cautions board members to be very careful how they approach nonprofit leaders. Don't patronize them. Many very smart people choose to work at nonprofits rather than in corporate settings. Jenny Gerard, from her time in senior management at the Trust for Public Land, remembers a board chair who at the end of every meeting shared a list of all the things fellow board members had done since the time of the last meeting. Now, this public thank you demonstrated both to the board and to senior staff how board members were taking action on behalf of the organization. And this also encouraged board members to be very active on behalf of TPL, and it's a great encouragement to senior staff. Marilyn talks about when one of her university board members set her up with the Chief Information Security Officer at Northrop Grumman to discuss IT security programs. It was extremely helpful to Marilyn in her role at George Mason, and the board member had volunteered this connection. So we've looked at being a good member and good board member in general, and how senior staff may regard the board. I want to end up here with some quick comments about the pivotal relationship of the chair. The chair of the board sets the tone for the organization. And the way the chair conducts regular meetings with the board and also the CEO will add or detract, I believe, from the productivity of the organization and the willingness of others to serve. No one else on the board has the responsibility of directing staff except the chair. The CEO reports to the board, but with direct accountability to the chair. And Jenny, after leaving Trust for Public Land, became a board member of the National Board of Rails to Trails. And as chair, landed the responsibility of helping the organization make the transition from a charismatic founder CEO to the next leader. A consulting firm told her that in this situation, about half of the CEOs who follow after a dynamic leader don't succeed. So she did two things. She met with the whole staff to talk about everyone's individual responsibility to be forward-thinking and positive as they sought the next leader, particularly in their comments outside the organization, because they wanted to attract, top flight candidates. Once the new CEO was selected as chair, Jenny met weekly by phone with him to provide maximum support during the first part of his tenure and throughout her tenure as chair. So I can tell you, I know that person became a highly capable leader and one who took the organization to its next level. Martha Aronson, who is current head of the Wellesley Alumnae Association, is also serving as chair of the Guthrie Theater Board in Minneapolis, of 64 members on that board. So Martha has organized board mentors for new board members. I think this is such an inventive idea to help them understand the level of detail in which board members should get involved. So that, for example, the day prior to a committee meeting, no board member feels empowered to request a detailed report with numerous metrics and a great deal of analysis. Or that at a board member's first meeting, it's not appropriate to fire multiple questions in rapid progression relating to the compensation of the head of the organization. This is just too much. She actually asked the mentors to sit next to their mentees at the first few meetings in the hope of avoiding any kinds of awkward interactions that can be demoralizing to staff. So in summary, the board chair really plays a very critical role helping the CEO of the organization see things that might not be obvious with relation to board relations, building donor relations, and helping connect dots to other parts of the organization. I believe scheduled meetings between the chair and the CEO are very important, not only for supporting the CEO, but also for raising critical issues in a timely fashion so that there are not surprises between board and staff. Board and staff, senior staff, really need to understand each other. Also, the board member welcomes new board members, and I'll give you another example from Martha's experience. She reached out to every one of Guthrie's board members and had face-to-face meetings with over 50 of them before she became chair. And from those conversations, she was able to build or solidify relationships and find out what part of serving they would most enjoy and where they hope to contribute the most. So this is a fairly speedy review of why the nonprofit sector is such a powerful one and the need for good governance and how we Wellesley women can provide such leadership with our background in education, with our sense of passion for serving in our communities. All of this makes great sense, both in the United States and around the world, of course, where, as I mentioned before, nonprofits are growing rapidly. So I want to thank today's cast very much. I got so many great ideas from these women, and I also got help from Courtney Sunkar, who's the program manager for the Business Leadership Council and the Career Education Office, with a particular shout out to Christy Liu, who was our technical advisor and made all of this work. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy that it only took me 30 minutes to say all that. So now we can open this up for questions, and let's see what we have. Okay, so somebody has, and Cindy, please participate if you see things that from your board experience you can help answer or comment on. Please let me.
Sure, and Susan, thank you so much. This was such rich content that you provided us all, and some of you on the phone may actually, or on the WebEx, may be serving on both for-profit and not-for-profit boards. What struck me about the remarks that you made and the points you were making, Susan, is how relevant they are across all lines in the boardroom, not just in a nonprofit board setting, in a corporate board setting, some of the techniques, some of the approach to whether or not an organization is the right organization to align with, all, fantastic points that I think we can all draw upon again and again as we navigate this world. So I would certainly encourage everybody to send questions in by chat. Susan, I'm assuming you've received some, actually.
I
so
have. Yes.
Start that.
Yeah. Okay. I've been, this is from a woman, I would say the name, I'm sure it's fine, Heidi Henderson. Let me know if you don't want me to say your name. Anyway, I've been asked to join a board, she says, where the financials are not great. It's an arts program that has lost funding, and board members have made cash flow loans to the organization, and there are no reserves. It has a good mission with committed board members who are trying to turn it around, but the financials are concerning. Assuming there is DEO and O insurance, should I consider joining or running away? This is tough. I do believe all nonprofit boards should carry insurance on their board members, and that is liability insurance, and that has always been my experience. This is a tough one. I think you really have to talk to the other board members and see how you feel. This is almost an instinctive call in some ways. If you feel that you can do it together, what the prospects are for the arts organization and what kind of leadership it has. I sometimes feel in nonprofits we get too much focused on the organization as opposed to the leadership. Who is the CEO of this organization? Do you really have confidence when they say they can turn it around that they really can do it? It's a tough call. Cindy, do you have any advice to add there?
No, I would say that's a tough call as well. And one of the situations that we hope we don't have to face, but I can't tell you it's unheard of. I think, probably many of us have had to go through a situation like that. So I would agree with you. I think you've got to canvass your fellow board members and see, where you're going to go with this one. Tough, very tough.
We have a question from Becky King, who says, thank you for the informative webinar. That's nice. I wonder if you might share some examples of board involvement donation expectations, how to find out if this is expected, and by the same token, are there examples of time commitments and work service that you can share? Boy, these are great questions. I think you simply have to ask. In some cases, I'm on a board where some people give $25,000 a year. Other people give maybe in the range of $1,000 to $2,000 because they don't have that kind of capacity, but they are charged to give and get. So in other words, I can't do so much, but I'm going to try to get other people to give to the organization. So I think the best way is that's when you just want to explore that question with the chair or CEO and just be very straightforward about it. Now, in terms of time commitments, right now I'm chairing a capital campaign in Seattle, and so that takes more time. I would say, oh gosh, maybe it's hard to estimate, but maybe an hour or two a week, I would say. Maybe I touch that. It kind of goes and comes. It depends, like when you have a CEO change or some particular committee, the responsibility, it can be more time. You always have to be very well prepared when you come into board meetings if you are charged with a particular responsibility or reporting thing. Cindy, can you add to that?
Yeah, let me add on the first one, Susan. One thing I would suggest you do on the financial commitment, if that hasn't been broached in conversations with the nominating committee or whoever is approaching you for the board, would be to be sure you're looking at the annual report from the organization. Usually organizations publish in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, a good idea. Yeah.
Their, supporters. And you can look through that for fellow board members to see what the range is or the levels that other board members seem to be doing to be supportive of the organization. And that may give you some clue before you even get going. And, I'll tell you just in general from my experience, on boards, I think it is critical to do a lot of due diligence on the board before you sign on. So I would typically be looking at the website. I'd be reading the annual report for the last couple of years. I would be certainly, hoping to meet with, some folks and gain their perspective, do the kind of internet research on them. GuideStar, which is the organization that rates nonprofit, is a good one to, plug in and see if anything, read their information, things of that nature, just in general. With respect to the time commitment, nonprofits, especially if they're substantial nonprofits, but really at any level, are a substantial time commitment. So, I just joined a new nonprofit, actually. It's the organization that runs the mansions in Newport and a bunch of other properties, and does a lot of other things in connection with preservation. And on that, the board meets 8 times a year, including one meeting that is not local. There are committee assignments.
Right.
I think you have to count on at least a couple of hours, probably, of preparation.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah. Cindy, I was jumping in to say I absolutely agree with you, and that's why when we talked about Barbara Creed saying 3 boards was her maximum, even when she was not working full time, and I'm finding 2 of them takes a lot of time once you get involved. And again, Mary McBride's comment about if it's small, you're going to find you're doing a lot, and Wellesley women tend to take on that work. We have so many questions, Cindy. I'm going to move along here.
Yeah, keep going. And we can always circle back with anybody, separately if you want to follow up on it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Dana Keep asks, for young alumni, how young is too young to seek a board position? I would say get out there, because I think that boards are really seeking younger people, strong, young, well-educated women. I think it's never too young. You just have to look around and find out where you fit and what the financial ramifications of that and your time commitment. But I say go for it. And young people on boards are tremendously useful to other older members in terms on many fronts, including technology and perspective. So it would be great. I have a question from Camille Berry asking, this is a great question. I wish I knew the answer to it. I'm leading a panel discussion on authentically diversifying your nonprofit board. Can you comment or direct me to resources that support this? Every board that I know of, I will say, is wanting to reflect our population and understanding that the population of America is changing in terms of its demographical aspects. We want boards that reflect the audiences that we serve. It is a big issue, and one that I don't know what kind of resources you can get. I would look at the National Endowment for the Arts, maybe go online. Now I want to do this myself and find out what nonprofit organizations might have, national help organizations that might have some ideas. Do you know of anything, Cindy?
I don't. I just saw this question. I think there are. I don't know offhand, but I'm happy to post this call, look into this, and when we post the recording, perhaps we can post some resources.
Oh, resources. That's a great idea. And maybe, and who knows, maybe this conversation will continue on the Hive as well. So that's a great other possibility. Is there a list available through the BLC or the Wellesley Alumni Association of boards Wellesley alumni have served on or are serving on? I don't know of such a list, but Olga Lurie, this is a really interesting question, because when I was starting to think about this talk, I was concerned about what's the level that I'm pitching at, what's the amount of information, because it may be that all of us are doing our utmost serving on boards, or maybe not enough. I was assuming that there was more to do, but we don't actually know that, and it's just a thought to have for the future, whether that would be helpful. I do know that Wellesley women, once they are on boards, this happened to me, a Wellesley woman on a board tapped me for that board. So we are that Wellesley network and mutual respect is very much in play on these kinds of subjects. Now, here is, this is really interesting. I love these questions. Catherine Lee is on a board of an organization that recently merged with another nonprofit. Do you have advice on nonprofit mergers? Yes. Do not underestimate how hard they are and how long it takes. You know, we think, okay, it makes sense to just put two organizations together. In my work at public media company, we did, and the staff continues to do, a lot of mergers of public radio organizations around the country. And it's challenging because, first of all, you've got two CEOs, and unless one is retiring or leaving, you have to work out what each of them is going to do in the new merged organization. And then you're often looking at two different cultures of the organization. So I think in the time, and then you have board mergers. There was one merger I was involved where you put the two boards together. I think you have to do everything possible to support it and understand that it takes a long time. Be very attentive. Get to know the other board members. Try to develop a collaborative spirit. Really try to understand with senior staff what the cultures might be of the two different organizations that are merged. It's very challenging. There cannot do enough to make sure that it goes smoothly, and also an acceptance that these mergers may get done on paper, but then it takes several years to really make them work smoothly. Now, is there any thought of listing open board positions via the Wellesley network, or is that already somewhere online? I don't know. Cindy, you might have a comment about that. I don't know that there's any resource available for Wellesley women to see that, but I know in the BLC board work, you've tried to figure out where there might be openings.
Yes, you know, we had started within BLC some efforts in this respect, but I think there's a lot more that could be done. And I'm making notes as, you know, these questions are coming in of things that, you know, we could certainly look into and do a better job college-wide, I think, honestly, on this. So, you know, it would be wonderful, I think, if we had a Wellesley database or some, you know, way of matching Wellesley women who are interested in board service with open board positions, that kind of thing. So, you know, I'm not aware of a centralized resource right now, but that doesn't mean there can't be one in the future.
Carolyn Blaney asked, can you speak more about insurance for board members? Should we expect to purchase our own insurance before joining? I say no. I say that should be the job of the organization. And as part of your due diligence and serious homework, you want to make sure that they have it. Lori, it's really a best practices in my view that you have to have insurance on the board members. From Lori Burlingame, are there organizations that can assist you in finding nonprofit board positions? There are usually in big cities organizations that are trying to help, excuse me, develop board members in the city. From a civic point of view, for example, a Seattle Foundation is looking for that or doing that, or there are different groups. I would say you have to kind of look around where you are and see what's available, and also just get out there as much as you can to meet people and find out what's going on. Here's another one. Many nonprofits are startup organizations, small, no staff or only one staff member. Much of the work of the organization needs to be done by volunteers. What are your thoughts about how board members can understand the need for their volunteer work that substitutes for what staff would normally do, and their need to serve in the more high-level traditional roles as a board member? Well, it's tricky. I mean, you have to be a real sort of entrepreneurial person in these situations. And I think that building scale is really an important element of really effective nonprofit. So I think while you're trying to volunteer and help them grow, I think you want to really keep your eye on the finances and the fundraising and the grants, and how can you build the revenue for the organization so that board members are not doing all the work. It's something you really want to move off of as fast as you can to get scale, I think, to really be effective. Cindy, jump in anytime.
I would add on this, and this is just a personal perspective, because in one aspect of my life, I've done some angel investing in startups, and have served on the boards of startups that, my angel group has taken a position in those situations. And I think really in all startup quote unquote situations, you really have to be ready to roll up your sleeves as part of being on the board, because these companies are not going to get off the ground unless they've got a lot of support. So that's, I think, something that you just have to understand when you're going into it and be ready to do that. So, you're wearing a couple of different hats. It's not always easy, but I think it's part and parcel of the startup world. So it can be extremely rewarding, by the way, to do that. But yeah, a little bit of a different animal than some of the other board positions that you might have.
We've got about almost 20 more questions, and we have 14 minutes to go. We're not going to get to everything, but we're going to try to spin through some of these, and then, as I say, try to figure out how to continue the conversation. This is a good one. How do you handle it if there's a very dominant board member who is disrespectful to other board members and the chair is not managing the situation? Boy, that is so tough. I guess the way I would approach this is I would talk to the chair about the situation and try to recommend ways that it could be handled. Maybe think about with other board members, how can we help sort of even this out? But I think that if the chair is not managing, maybe the chair doesn't know how to. So I guess that would be my first approach, sort of a helpful, here's some things that I think you could do that would be really helpful to the rest of us. So, please post or distribute the website where this presentation is made available. And I think we said at the beginning, you may not have heard this, that it's going to be on the alumni resources and career ed website, and also on the Wellesley's Business Leadership Council's website. So that can help. Okay, the Service Organizations for the Arts, League of American Orchestras, Chorus America, are researching the topics of diversity and inclusion. Oh, thank you very much. Here's the answer to that question. Extensively, and spending time at their conferences about this as they work with arts boards all over the country. You might consider contacting them for the diversity and inclusion discussion. So for the person who asked that, League of American Orchestras, Chorus America, service organizations for the question about diversity. That's great. One Wellesley woman helping another. Wonderful. Okay, is there a trusted list of consultants, including Wellesley women, already serving on boards who can help those of us who are on boards that need an improved government structure or sounding board? No pun intended. I'm not sure we have set something like that up, but if in fact this webinar is the start of a bigger conversation, maybe we can think about, and we see that nonprofit board service really is a big interest and a growth area for Wellesley alumni. Maybe that's something that we can all think about in terms of who might be available in sort of a mentorship way. We have mentoring going on through the Hive. Maybe this is a special alumni to alumni piece of that puzzle that could be helpful.
Susan, let me jump in.
Yeah.
Just one thought. Having served on the board of an organization that funded a lot of nonprofits, we actually had consultants and could facilitate some of that for the nonprofits that we were working with. So you might, in your particular area, look to some of the funders and see, whether or not they've got resources that could be available to you. One other website that you might look at is the website of the Council on Foundations, which is
Right.
an organization that really is geared to philanthropists, but they have just all kinds of resources, and I'm pretty sure it could steer you in the right direction depending on the issue you might need some consulting on.
There are more questions about where this presentation will be set up, and I think we've said career education and the BLC website, so that will be available. I've lost some of the questions that were lining up here. I can't get to them for some reason, but if you have more questions, again, we're going to try to figure out how to continue the conversation. But the next question is how to make sure I'm being a productive board member and wanting a follow-on conversation. I think we addressed that. Somebody also mentions that Charity Strong is an excellent board matching organization, and saying that a Wellesley specific resource would be helpful. So I had on the chat function, I had that we had about 15 more questions, but some way they're not coming up right now. So it may be that people tuned out at this point or couldn't stay with it, or something's not quite right here. But they were just such great questions here. And the live, oh, here's a new message. Let's see. Yeah, I think they're going to come on here in a minute, but we'll just wait for a second to make sure we have about 9 minutes left. So if you have something else to say and want to go on the chat function, to do it. I think there were a lot more questions, and there may come up, and there's such good questions about liability, also about working with your board members. I'll tell you, in the best boards, there's really a great congeniality about it, but that doesn't always happen. One thing that I think is important is when you're on a board is to keep looking at ways to make it more satisfying for yourself and with the other board members. I know one board that I was on talked about needing to have more social events with the board. And I also like to find out from a fellow board member who I don't know, how did you come to this? Or so, for example, in the classical music institution, I focus. So what was your first experience with music? Or why do you have this passion? I think it's a way of getting to know each other that then can help us when we work together on topics connected with the organization. Cindy,
Susan,
do you have more observations in general?
Yeah, a couple, just following on to that. Certainly in organizations where I've been the chair, I will try to have at least, a social component, whether it's an event or something, at least once a year, just for the board members, to, relax, get to know each other, when they're not sitting around the table. And, these are busy people. Everybody is busy. We're all busy. So, it can be hard to do that, but I think it's essential to do it. Certainly, you may want to include senior staff in that, but, I think there's a place for just the board. No, significant others, no whatever else, to get together and to just get to know each other on a more personal level, because the collegiality and all is so important on any board, and you want to begin to build those relationships. So just to offer that. And then, one topic we haven't touched on, I think, yet, Susan, but in thinking about the liability question, I was wondering if you might give a perspective on that. And that's, reputational risk that we take on, we affiliate with an organization on the board. And, we don't need to spend a lot of time reading the news to understand that this can be a big issue. And it it spans from the really small organizations to the really large, if there's, malfeasance or something else that's going on. So I was, wondering if you had any comments on that, or
No, I think you
what
have
you've
to be very
seen.
attentive on behalf of the organization and very transparent about what's going on. And my sort of rule of thumb on a board is when anything's suggested, even like in a confidential executive session, if this were in the press, how do we feel about it? I mean, that is just like a little litmus test beyond sort of your ethical ideas about what goes and what doesn't go. But I think you have to be very careful about that. I also think that sometimes when something adverse happens to a nonprofit, it gets blown out of proportion. There was a United Way instance years ago about a grandiose CEO salary incident. I got so sick of hearing about that, and it really, it can happen, but you have to move on. As we've talked about, it's a big sector and it's as diverse in many ways as the corporate sector. So you can't get too fixed on one nonprofit having a big problem, and that kind of affects your opinion of all of them. We've got a couple of more questions here. We got a few minutes, so I want to just pick these up. Are marketing functions successfully undertaken by board committees, or are organizations better served by leaving that to the administration and staff? I would say marketing is extremely important to every organization, nonprofit and profit, and a partnership between a board, committee, and staff is really where you want to be. I think it's very appropriate for board members to be involved in the strategy and sounding boards for the marketing people in the organization, because sometimes from your own experience in another sphere, you can see things that might be useful. But again, you just have to work with the senior staff and with the CEO to make sure that the board member and the staff person are very clear about each of their roles, avoiding that micromanaging as much as possible. And I think the openness of the CEO, just as the chair sets the tone for the board, the CEO also sets the tone for that kind of partnership and involvement. Here's a comment from Aaron Keith. With boards looking seriously about improving diversity and inclusion, do you foresee boards being willing to think more broadly, inclusively about changing their traditional expectations of fairly high levels of financial contributions? For many people of many ages and backgrounds, a $1,000 annual contribution is enormous, even though it could be considered small in many board circles. However, just because someone doesn't have a substantial amount of money to give doesn't mean they don't have other very valuable contributions to make. Might there be a culture shift? I think that is highly possible. I think that there are many really wonderful board members who don't have a particular financial capacity. With that said, I think if a person comes on in that position, they have to be quite aware that the organization really needs to fundraise, if in fact it does, which is true for many nonprofits. And so in that situation, they've got to be willing to get out there and to get others to give. But certainly having people who are not at a high level of contribution can bring strategic and thoughtful resources to the board, and we really do need to be open to that.
I would
Cindy,
suggest,
do you have any last words? Yeah.
I was going to say, I would suggest that conversation take place, and I
Sorry,
absolutely. I wouldn't feel badly at all about having that direct conversation with the nominating and governance committee chair or whoever's approaching you for the board.
Right.
And to, say right up front, my ability to make a substantial contribution to the organization is limited right now. I understand if that's, something that it could be a disqualifier to my service at this time. And if so, I hope, you'll keep me in mind in the future. But if not, I can contribute something, and I certainly will commit to lending my time, effort, and so on in ways that'll be useful to the board. And, a lot of times boards are looking for 100% commitment by the board that every single board member has made a contribution, because they report on that basis, as opposed to, how big the contribution is. So even a, you know, smaller contribution,
Right.
whatever comfortable, can be extremely meaningful in that statistic. So I wouldn't feel
Right.
at all put off. I have the conversation up front and realize that, you know, you
Well,
can offer a lot.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that final word is great, brings us to the end of this. I want to thank all of you who participated, who listened, who sent in your questions and comments. And again, thank you to the people who helped me put this together. It was really great to do this. I do hope we'll continue the conversation, and thank you again to all for doing this together today. So be direct, get out there, and I, again, think this is a great opportunity for leadership of Wellesley women. So bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Susan, so very much. And thank you, Courtney, and to everyone in the Career Education Office. Great webinar, and I hope this will just be the start of this conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.